Hello, everyone, and welcome to episode 89 of Podcast vs. Enemies, a Destiny Massive Breakdown show. It's been a jam-packed week for the launch of Season of the Wish, and we have got a ton of stuff to cover in our first impressions. So without further ado, Court, how have you been? What have you been up to this week?
Hello, Saint Impetus. Hope you lads are doing well. With it being in the new season, I've been doing plenty of the new content. I think we'll talk a little bit in the rest of this episode, but highlights for me, Warlord's Ruin and Coil. Lots of fun there. Shout out to DMB patrons Phaeton and Superstay for the day one blind dungeon run. Also, shout out to fellow host here, Saint and Chris Proctor from the Bungie's Weapon team for a wee farming session to get some rocket pistol rolls. And finally, just to note here, my Champion Counters infographic for Season 23 is also out. You can view that over on my socials, over on the DMB Discord, or on the show notes. Put a note in there. A shout out also to the Destiny 2 Lost Sector account for showcasing my infographic on their Discord server, their Twitter, and they've got it up on their Discord bot as well. So if you want, if you've got a server, if you want a Discord bot that kind of showcases the daily rotation for Lost Sectors, which I know we'll be talking about as well, but obviously those got the changes for farming some weapons in there. Go check them out. Impetus, how are you doing?
I'm doing well. I've been doing a lot of different stuff, much like you and Saint. I am definitely wishing for world loot for the next 185 days or so that we have in this gigantic season, because there's some absolute juicers out there, and I am hoping to get them sooner rather than later. But yes, I've been doing Coils runs galore. I did a Warlord's Ruin blind with Saint and Aeon Sigma. Shout out to both of you guys. Thanks for that. That was a ton of fun. Mm-hmm. And then quite a few strikes for that Thorn Catalyst, which I did manage to land just earlier today. Haven't even made any progress on it, but I've got it, and I will be working on it. Saint, how about yourself?
I'm grateful to be about halfway through my Thorn Catalyst at this point, or maybe 60% on the kills, defeats, whatever you want to call it. I will also say that, man, that feels really good. The whole overflowing the magazine and just being able to churn through, like the magazine overflow takes effect as soon as you slot the exotic. And then I think it's the other benefits that you get once you finish, or the catalyst, I should say, for the exotic. But yeah, already feeling really good just for the overflow aspect of that. Using that with something like Necrotic Rips is going to go quite hard in PvE, I would imagine, up to at least pretty middling to high content. Yeah, the new dungeon run with Impetus and Aeon here was great. We got through that in like 2 hours, which I feel like is pretty short for going into the blind dungeon like after work. Got stuck in the jail, of course, for probably maybe longer or just as long as any one of the boss fight encounters, I think. I got the exotic on our first clear, on our blind clear of the dungeon. I got the new Buried Bloodlines exotic to drop, and that has never happened to me ever in terms of Destiny. Getting a dungeon or raid exotic on the first try has never happened to me. I think maybe like 12th or 15th clear is like the lowest I've ever gotten on something like that. So really stoked about that. Enjoying that one a lot. It is kind of like in the way that Warden's Law shoots 2 shots at a time. It's kind of like that, and it hits really hard, and it can give you Devour. And I don't know exact like damage numbers, so I won't give any hard quotes there. But using it on Void Titan, you are quite tough, and it does quite a lot of damage. So I'm sure we'll have some more specific numbers on that over the next couple episodes. But let's keep things going here. Impetus, who do we have to thank before we jump into the meat of the episode?
Well, we do want to give a big shout out to all of our listeners who have featured us in their Spotify Wrapped. We got tagged by a bunch of people in the Discord showing us where PvE ranked in their most listened to podcasts for the past year. So we greatly appreciate everyone who listens in for every episode and bothered to tag us. That means so much to us to see that we do factor into your lives in some aspect. So shout out to all of you for tagging us, and then all of you who didn't tag us but still have us in your Spotify Wrapped or any other kind of playlist application that you listen to. Thank you so much. We greatly appreciate you. And of course, we do want to shout out our sponsors, another group of folks that we greatly appreciate. These people go above and beyond in their support. A Modern Viking, Askian Monk, Bryce Aroni, Deacon, I'm K Rose, Moonlight, and This Moment. Thank you so much. You can send us all kinds of feedback directly to any of our socials or via the Destiny Massive Breakdowns Discord server. All kinds of feedback help with the trajectory of the podcast and how we present and break down builds, activities, and so much more in the PvE sandbox for all kinds of Destiny players. We do also want to extend a special thanks and appreciation to everyone that supports PvE, whether that's downloading and listening to the show, discussing it on social media in our Discord server, or supporting us via Patreon. And speaking of Patreon, if you'd like to support the show, please visit DestinyMassiveBreakdowns.com and click on the link to Patreon. You'll get access to members-only channels in Discord, behind-the-scenes like episode previews, input on the future of the show, and access to the legendary annual merch drop, which is coming up very shortly. Court, what are we talking about today?
Yeah, so with this being the sort of start of a new season, we're just going to give our kind of quick impressions, just kind of some highlights that we've kind of noticed, gush about a certain activity, no doubt, for about 2 hours. Yeah, we've got some Bungie highlights, and then we've obviously got some early impressions for the season. So let's get cracking, shall we? So some Bungie updates, sort of highlights, if you've not noticed them, all over on the socials. They did confirm that Final Shape has been delayed, and they did give us a little schedule update for the next couple of months. So June 4th, 2024 is Final Shape Day, and they'll share more information related to Final Shape in April. In February, we'll be seeing weekly progression-based quests called Wishes, and the launch of Moments of Triumph with unique rewards. Guardian Games is being moved up to March, and quote, Into the Light, whatever that is, begins in April, and they say it's to prepare players for their Guardian's journey into the Traveller. So there's going to be a little kind of mini event. I certainly would temper your expectations. I wouldn't expect it to be as large as, say, the 30th anniversary pack, but they're going to fill the gap with something. Yeah, we've got quite a long time between now and June. So it's definitely time to take it nice and slow, nice and easy. Tick off those wish lists and other games that we've been kind of putting off to play Destiny. They updated the schedule here, so we have the Dawning, which begins the 12th of December and it ends the 2nd of January. We have confirmed 3 dates for Iron Banner. I'm going to assume that they'll add more in the future after February, but we've got 5th of December, 2nd of January, and the 23rd of January. And more so for us, GMs, they begin the 19th of December, and they open up fully with all of the nodes selectable if you haven't already done them. The 9th of January. Just as a reminder, we have Psyops Cosmodrome, we've got Birthplace of the Vile, Hypernet Current, Lake of Shadows, The Corrupted, Battleground Moon. Those are our picks for the Grandmasters. So Cosmodrome, Psyops is our new one, and we've seen the rest. I think every time we've had a long season, people have pointed out that it's always got Lake of Shadows and The Corrupted. And just finally... sorry, go ahead.
Go ahead. I was going to say, is that the one where you fight the Cabal with the jetpack at the end, or is that the one with Sabathun's copy that you have to fight at the end? With
Which one, sorry?
Guy with the shield.
Psyops Cosmodrome has
Cosmodrome?
the Knight, Lightbearer Knight at the end.
Yeah. Quite a small location, but I think there's plenty of cover. can be a little bit hairy. But yeah, so you fight the Savathun copies between each damage phase, just to sort of unlock them and then damage them again. But yeah, some interesting picks. We'll obviously talk about them when we get to them. Psyops Cosmodrome, we'll do a little kind of breakdown, some builds for that as well. Fireteam Finder here, just as a little last note in terms of updates before we get into the meat and potatoes of this episode. We have, obviously, that a couple of days ago, at the time of recording this episode, they had the raid stress test. Apparently went really well. The three of us, we never had much time to get onto that. I was planning to do it, but that was when I was trying to update all my infographics and all that, so I didn't manage to get in there. But from the reception, I think it's went really well. It's very robust. Functionally, it worked really well. I think the only feedback point which Bungie did report is that it wasn't respecting checkpoints, so you couldn't go in there and just farm a checkpoint for that week. But they did come out and say that that wasn't intended. You should be able to respect checkpoints. Should go into a raid with a checkpoint, and they're going to add additional titles and tags for checkpoint sessions to convey the lobby's purpose in the future. So December 6th, so by the time this episode goes out, we will have a beta for the Fireteam Finder, and then they are targeting late January for the full release. So you guys got any further thoughts with Fireteam Finder? Obviously, like I said, we never really played around with it, but
I gotta look at the various modifiers. I haven't even clicked on the menu option in game yet, so I don't even know the full extent to what they let you filter for, but I have seen some screenshots, and some people have been memeing on a few of them, but I want to look for myself before I give any comment.
Yeah, the only stuff I've seen is people trolling, basically, which is inevitable with any kind of social interactive game system like this, but I did see some people praise their experiences with it, and it also seemed to functionally work very well, which is great considering they have said a few different times that this has been a ridiculously complex thing in practicality to implement into the game. So the fact that they came out with their beta when it sounded very unstable and then seemingly things all went fine is great to see. There's also just a lot. There's a lot happening, and there's a lot that's going to queue up. Iron Banner starts on the 5th. And then the next day, you've got Fireteam Finder. That's going to be another kind of people trying to queue up for Iron Banner. How is that going to go? We've got the Dawning a week after that. We got GMs a week after that. So there's, the seasons kind of seemingly keep flowing pretty well here, which is nice. And a certain activity that we've been playing a lot seems to also be getting some iterations based off some Bungie comments that we saw earlier this week. Kind of transition this right into the Season 23, Season of the Wish. We'll start off with the activities here. We've got Riven's Lair, the Coil, and a refresh version of the Blind Well. So I feel like the Riven's Lair and the Coil are very much so iterative of the Riven's Lair is kind of your base version, and then the Coil is your much more advanced, involved version of that. And then the Blind Well refresh is basically the way that they cranked all the enemy, levels up there, and I believe put it on some kind of parity lock where you can't over level past a certain extent. And then there is direct load in matchmaking for the Blind Well, which is nice. Some people complained about it because they had to go back to an old activity, which I don't really mind considering it's been pumped up. The one thing I will say right off the bat though is I think that the loot pool for the Blind Well seems kind of weird. Based on what you can get to drop from there, would think it would be the reprised Dreaming City weapons, which we'll talk more about in just a second. But there's some other stuff kind of diluting that loot pool a little bit, which feels strange. Imtis, I'll throw it over to you. Kind of initial any thoughts on Blind Well coming back? What's the vibe there?
As a vehicle to get Dreaming City weapons, it's fine. I remember that they did make, I can't remember when it happened, but some time ago they made a change where you were guaranteed Dreaming City weapons. Was it actually, it might have been when the Dreaming City weapons did fully get refreshed the first time back in, was it Splicer or something like that? They made a change where you could acquire them a little bit more easily if you did high tier blind well completions, and then also they were dropping from the Shattered Throne dungeon. So I wasn't surprised once I saw that the Dreaming City weapons were reprised that Blind Well was also getting an update. But yeah, there's also this controversial issue where Season of Defiance weapons are dropping from Blind Well completions. If you have the season, you can still go and get those weapons. I don't know if they're dropping for people who don't have Season of Defiance, that season pass. But it does seem odd that a season that is still technically purchasable is dropping weapons from a completely different source in a completely different season. So I think that's where the confusion and controversy is coming from. I don't care for it. It does absolutely feel like an attempt to just dilute what feels like a glorified public event activity loot pool when I'm trying to go for the new stuff and I've already got the old stuff, and I've got the old stuff crafted even on top of that, because the Dreaming City weapons are not craftable. So I don't care for it. But yeah, it's slightly more difficult than the last time I played it. It's fine. It's still the Blind Well, and I don't feel anything different beyond that. Court, anything else to add on of the Blind Well as a refresh?
I mean, it's cool to see it getting a slight difficulty nudge up. I'm just kind of like done with the Blind Well because I spent many hours in that activity, and don't get me wrong, it's a fine activity, but it really showcases how far we've come in terms of like quote public event type activities.
True.
In terms of like the loot drops, I'm not like I would be okay if this was the season, or say the episode, whatever comes after Final Shape, where we don't have direct access to Defiance weapons, but we still have Defiance weapons in the game. If you're brand new to the game, you can go in and play that activity. Yes, it's not the activity. It was, 6-8 months ago, but having it drop within that Blind Well is, it's not somewhere I want to go and farm for the Dreaming City weapons. But there is an activity which I do want to go and farm quite a lot, and that is the Coil. I think agree with my fellow hosts here. I think we're all in agreement that the Coil is one of the best activities that they've added to this game. Bear in mind, this is only week 1. They have came out, Bungie did come out and say there's going to be different paths, there's going to be different bosses. So we've only got the experience of 1 week, but wow, it's been a banger of a week. I just like dripping, just completely waterfall of loot by the time you get to the end, and there is definitely like difficulty there, so you got to be on your game. You can load in as a solo player. There's a sort of non-match made if you want to go in as a duo. If you want to go in with randomers, be our guest, but obviously that would be added to the Fireteam finder function, so you don't need to faff about with matchmaking, but presumably that will still be a thing anyway. But yeah, Coil, a lot of fun. It progressively gets difficult. You get loot during it. It's not a waste of time. And these runs can last 45, 50 minutes, and it doesn't feel like it. Like we've talked about GM's Battlegrounds being quite a slog. Lasting 45 minutes, 50 minutes, and it's just like, oh man, this is really boring now. You get to the final boss and you're looking at the ticker and it's 45 minutes. You're like, I'm not really going to get really a lot of loot from this. I'm guaranteed to get a drop, yes, but I'm about to get like the worst roll for the new Arc Waveframe grenade launcher, which we'll talk about later. But yeah, just being showered in loot here, the whole kind of rushing around, hitting the pots. There's bonus chests if you do it in a time limit. If you get your score up to platinum, you will get so much end game material loot. It's just such a fun activity. I am having such a blast. Saint, what's your vibes with the Coil?
Yeah, I really I like the kind of the balance of the revives, which we've talked about a little bit when we were just I mean, we were just playing the coil. I just went through with like Rock and Phaeton like right before we started. So the idea of balancing out the revive counter with orbiting based off of like extinguish. So you're not going to just go to orbit if you wipe, but if you run out of revives and you die, you will go to orbit. So there's like a bit of a threat there, even if it may not be super difficult to keep your lives up in between the waves as you go. It's 4 tiers, 1 to 4 on the tiers, so to say. And I think that creates like a decent like balance of challenge, like difficulty threatening the player to like want to try to play your life a little bit because you don't have a timer, as far as like the score goes or anything out, like that. You're just trying to stay alive, play your life relatively strategically. You can afford a few deaths, some spike traps here and there. And the rewards, the Ascendant Alloys, right, is your material to enhance your enhanced traits, or to create your enhanced traits.
That's right.
And man, wow, that feels good, because grinding out Ascendant Alloys used to be... there was just like no really great way to do it that didn't feel like a slog to me, and I think that is a sentiment shared with a lot of people. And grinding out the coil, I'll get I got a vouchsafe drop and a retold tale drop that are random rolls, so I'm always interested in that, as well as maybe I got a red border for the new trace rifle, and I got 2 I can now have enough materials to do another couple enhanced traits on the weapons that I'm going to be crafting from this. And that's the kind of a thing that is going to keep me coming back to an activity like that for like a long season, especially if, like they were talking about, there's 2 or 3 weeks of rotation where it can change up a little bit. Really enjoy it. Absolutely a hit. Impetus.
Yeah, I want to give just a quick PSA on how it works, because I've seen a lot of confusion about it on Reddit in particular. And lads, feel free to chime in here if I'm leaving out details. But there are 4 rooms, and they do escalate in difficulty. It is not like the Altars of Summoning from last season, where you can stay in the activity infinitely. There is a hard end to it. It's 4 rooms max that you can get through, and in between each of those rooms, you'll go back to Riven to purchase some buffs, and then also to collect the loot that you earned as a result of completing the previous room. I did my very first Coil run do the matchmade activity because I wasn't quite sure what to expect. And I had some people leave after the second room for whatever reason, probably maybe because the seasonal quest that introduced you to the Coil completed, but you can keep going. It's once you get to the 4th room that it actually does stop, and you'll be done with the activity itself, but the difficulty increases by 5 each room that you keep going into. The enemy power level scales by 5. So by the time you get to the 4th room, you're basically playing on GM difficulty. However, there's no time limit at all. It's the only thing that kind of really limits you in your capacity to do the activity is your revives. If you all wipe, your entire fire team wipes, or your duo wipes, or your solo wipes, and you got 0 revives, you do go to orbit. That's the one wipe mechanic, but you can stay in those rooms as long as you need to with no worry, right? There's no time limit to complete the boss fight. You just need to stay alive. At the end of each room, you'll go back to Riven. You can keep purchasing buffs from the glass shards. It's a currency that you acquire in the activity itself. You can't stack it and carry it from coil run to coil run. It resets as soon as you leave the activity. Buy a bunch of buffs here. You cannot purchase weapons or armor in the activity. Those are chests that will drop as you keep going up the difficulties. I think once you complete it's either the 2nd room or the 3rd room, you'll get 2 chests, one specifically for weapons and one for armor. There's a little floating icon above it. That's where you get to make a selection there at that point. And then in the 4th room, you get a ton of different chests, plus an armor chest and a dedicated weapons chest. The secret chests that you can unlock as you're progressing through the little traversal section, which is where you'll get a lot of the traps or extra trap-like mechanics, those can drop your Dreaming City weapons, and then you can also get some of the Season of the Wish weapons. When you get to the higher tiers, I've also had some of the Vex Offensive weapons drop from that chest that shows up at Ribbon as well. I've gotten a few Vex Offensive red borders there. That seems to be how you can get the Vex Offensive weapons. I haven't gotten those to drop from Riven's Lair, although that could just be my RNG. Yeah, and then once you hit the third room completion and the fourth room completion, you'll also start getting those in-game crafting materials, your ascendant, what are they called? Alloys. There it is, ascendant alloys for crafting. And by the time you hit the fourth room, and especially if you get a platinum score, which is based on the number of glass shards you collect, I've got multiple ascendant alloys to drop as well. And in fact, I think my ascendant alloy count is almost equal to my ascendant shard count, which is never happened before since Ascendant Alloys debuted. So yeah, it's a very rewarding activity. I love it so much for that. I also love the mechanics and the way that the difficulty scales, but do treat it seriously if you're going in. You want to get to that fourth room for the maximum amount of rewards, and you will need a pretty in-game viable build. The third room, if that's all you're going for, is still pretty rewarding, but once you hit that platinum score and complete the fourth room, that's when you get 5 chests, I think it is, 5-6 chests on top of the armor chest or weapons chest that you get to choose from, because you can't get both unlocked. But yeah, great activity. One of my favorite seasonal activity, I think, in my opinion, of all the seasonal activities that I've played. And keep in mind, I started during Season of Arrivals. The Coil's the best one that I've played. This is my number 1. But I understand some people really enjoyed Menagerie and the way that treated loot in the loot chase, but to me, the Coil just gave me a ton of drops, and it scaled really well in difficulty and was fun to play. So, Court, do you have anything extra to add about the mechanics? Saint, do you have anything extra to add that I might have left out about that?
Well, there's no champions, at least in the current format. I don't know if we'll get a legend mode of the Coil, but I mean, it's already kind of legend mode by the time you get to tier 3 and tier 4. But no, at the time of recording this, at the time of us playing it, the Coil does not have champions attached to it. But that doesn't mean you don't go in with an end game build, because the first encounter, or the first tier, I should say, is fairly standard. It is your kind of same level +5, but then once you get into tier 2 and tier 3 and tier 4, it's definitely, you will be showered with loot as long as you're getting to the end and actually completing the activity, because it can get quite hairy. So yeah, as just to kind of highlight Impetus's point there, it's take this seriously, and the game will kind of reward you back with your time. 45 minutes is quite it's not a slog, but it's a long period of time for many players, especially if you are more kind of a casual player. You don't have a lot of time, but if you want to get that end game loot material, then please make that time and get those builds. Maybe we'll share some builds at some point in the future, just to kind of really maximize the potential of the Coil. I know the three of us, we've been running kind of more end game builds as of recently anyway, but yeah, some we should share at some point. And just as a last point, I think if deep dives and altars of summoning were the sort of like foundation for this activity to exist, and I'm really glad that we got to go through that kind of, deep dives was great, being able to pick your modifiers, and then you're traversing deeper into each activity. It's a very similar vibe to the Coil, and then obviously altars of summoning was that kind of infinite. You can be in there all day. You can put the difficulty tier, whatever you want. But then we've got this, which is kind of a culmination of both, and we've seen before with kind of your three person activities. And yeah, I'm just loving it. I think I'm going to be in the Coil for much of this season. Saint?
I was going to say the one thing I wanted to add was kind of when you're going back and referencing our last few seasonal activities, which I think is a great point of reference, because we've talked a lot about like the deep dive buffs versus the Arcana cards versus now like Riven's, kind of vendor glass shards, whatever you want to call it here in this one. And I really like these like roguelike kind of mechanics that they've been adding in little bit by bit. And I think this is another really good version of it, because as much as I think like the Arcana cards, like the idea of the Arcana cards is like top notch, like fits the lore, like 10 out of 10, very cool thing. I didn't like having to memorize the effects of each of them. And then also it's just like, you just have a 1 in 5 chance of pulling the card that you want anytime that you go through the activity. So lore wise, 10 out of 10, practically like getting the buff that I'm looking for. like 50-50 basically. And then now in this case, you're specifically choosing which, pieces to like invest your currency in as you go further and further. First one, you're getting maybe a 10% incoming damage reduction from an enemy type. And the next one, you're getting a class recharge ability or grenade regen, increase. And the final one will be some major piece there. You can also choose to go back and invest and like buy more revive tokens. If you're going in the last arena, you got like 3 revives, maybe spend your like 400 chards and bump that up to 10 revives across a couple of teammates. Also, as kind of a PSA, I know, Court, you mentioned on one of our runs that there is like a solar run where it is Scorch that you should absolutely not be buying at the time. What was that? What is that one? What's the effect on it?
I can't remember the name of the actual modifier, but it's one of the last or like kind of higher unlocks where it's you basically apply your solar weapons apply Scorch intrinsically, but there's like a bug related to that where you can get infinite ignitions. Combatants start being janky and they stop like working entirely, and then the game crashes. I haven't experienced it, but if you just search it on YouTube, you'll be able to see videos of it, and it is quite wild. Just hearing that ignition going off like constantly before your game crashes. It's like, is that my PC or my console that's about to ignite?
So the one that's like increased solar abilities, great. Makes consecration and the revitalizing blast and stuff awesome. The one that gives free Scorch will explode your PC. So know the difference, okay? It's gonna cost you.
I should also point out those modifiers, they kind of softly rotate. I don't know what the cadence is, but I've seen where it's been void sometimes instead of solar. And then it's been like strand sometimes, and so they are slightly different every time you go in there. I think there's maybe a few that are always going to be there. I think I've always seen the one where you get your ability back, your class ability back. That, or I've just been really lucky. But there is a soft reset or refresh, I should say, for each of those modifiers.
Yeah.
Oh, well, did we talk about the loot goblin as well?
No, we had not.
That's a good shout out. Go ahead, Court.
So there, is it a guaranteed spawn? I've seen it a few times, but there's been a few runs where I've not seen.
I don't think so.
All right,
I don't think it's guaranteed.
It's a what is it? A Taken Vex? I can't.
Yeah, it's been a Vex for me, but it's like a mini boss,
like a Taken Minotaur kind of mini boss guy. Yeah.
So this is this season's kind of loot goblin. So if you see this mini boss Vex, it will be running away. You want to merc that. You want to really burst that combatant down, but don't do it near a ledge, because when you kill this loot goblin, it will spew out a bunch of those motes and the red shards. So you want to do it on a flat ground if possible. But again, it's not, at least we think it's not entirely 100% guaranteed to get it. But if you do, then it's a very kind of thankful run, because it makes your platinum progression much easier to get.
And it spawns in the sections in between the actual fight rooms.
Yes.
The traversal areas. I think for me, the one that I've seen it showed up in between the third and the fourth room. But it's like, for me, it was in the latter half when I saw it. I don't know what you guys saw on your runs.
I think...
Yeah, I've seen it twice, and it's been in the latter half. Like
I think between the second and third tier for me. Okay. I've never seen it as early as that, at least the runs I've been in.
Yeah. All right, well... Speaking of scorching and igniting things, just
setting my PC on fire.
Let's talk about Dragon's Breath. This is a really old exotic that got this big time rework that they had detailed out a few weeks ago, and there was kind of this like on the fence of, I don't know how it's gonna land, and there's some naysayers and some copium going around about its potential in the current sandbox. And Impetus, before I say anything, what's the vibe? How do you think Dragon's Breath has landed in D2? It's a big rework.
Holy fire, Batman. I mean, it's a lot. We use Dragon's Breath on the boss fight for the Dungeon Warlord's Ruin. Kind of playing it safe, Saint, right? Like that was kind of our thought there. Definitely could have dealt more damage with some other options, but my goodness, it was definitely cooking for sure. I've taken it for a spin, just kind of going through the intro seasonal quest line on a few of my alternative characters. And yeah, it's pretty awesome to just spew a ton of fire as you kind of fire at a larger enemy in the distance, and then you've got some minor enemies kind of marching towards me in front of me. You just shoot the rocket over their head, the fire rains down on them. You start seeing damage numbers populate all over your screen as they're taking damage. It's crazy. I'll say this: the one thing that I don't like about it is sometimes it can be a little difficult to tell which fire pit on the ground is friendly because a Dragon's Breath spawned or it's actually an enemy attack, and I should not be standing in the fire because you cannot tell the difference visually between what you dealt with Dragon's Breath and what an enemy dealt with their one of their attacks. So, but it's great for a solar build. It's really just Solar 3.0, a rocket launcher, and it seems to be doing some pretty good damage. I think it's more of a, from what I've seen based on the testing that Mossy and Rock have been doing, it's like a total damage kind of a situation. Not a lot of DPS necessarily, damage per second, but I haven't unlocked the Catalyst, but from what I've seen of people that have unlocked the Catalyst, looks like it's definitely going for a lot of high total damage. Just whether or not that'll be useful in certain situations, I think, again, it depends when it comes to total damage, but it's putting out numbers for sure. Gort, what are your thoughts on Dragon's Breath?
Well, I was just about to say, the Catalyst, so the time between the fuel stacks is now decreased from 18 seconds to 15 seconds after reaching ×5. So a lot faster to get down, to get to those high stacks, which is what you kind of want with the Dragon's Breath. And yeah, absolutely a great total damage weapon, but also it's just a great ad clear weapon, because that's actually the exotic that I've been using in my Coil runs with, we'll talk about the exotic reworks. That's part of one of my builds that I've been running through. Yeah, like, to be honest, I was one of those naysayers saying I thought this was, I was going in with pretty low expectations, thinking, the Destiny 1 version, it was great on paper, but in practice it was quite meh. But as a seasonal weapon, this thing is great. This is just fantastic. Because normally they kind of keep the seasonal weapons to, it's not going to be too out there. We've had Witherhoard, obviously that was one of our kind of big kind of seasonal weapons back in Arrivals, where that was attached to our seasonal rank up. But Dragon's Breath, just, it's like, I really love it, really enjoying it. We'll probably talk about Dragon's Breath in terms of a technical sense at some point. There's a lot of kind of going on. I'm just looking at the data compendium, and there's like 6 paragraphs worth of what is going on here. I should also point out the Catalyst. Again, this is just from the data compendium. I don't have it to try it out, but the kills spawns fire sprites, as we know, but apparently without any cooldown. So there may be lots of fire sprites in the Coil that you can pick up to build into your grenade based builds. Get that 12.5%.
Starfire's back, grenade. Baby. Let's go.
We're cooking. Another thing I wanted to mention about this is that there appears to be something going on when you are Radiant and have anti-barrier, or you are Overload and you shoot the rocket. So if you have Overload rocket on, or if you're Radiant giving Dragon's Breath anti-barrier, that the ignition damage goes way up. And I don't know what exactly is causing that or going on there. I remember reading some stuff in this science forum and in like science discussion thread the other day, but the damage is quite high. And additionally, you can increase your ignition's damage by being radiant, which is, let's say you're using your solar hand cannon, pulse rifle, whatever have you. You get your radiant up, you swap over to Dragon's Breath, and you shoot off a rocket at the champion. It's doing pretty significantly increased ignition damage, and the radiant can also increase your ignition damage, which a radiant is like 20%, 25%?
25.
20, yeah. So it's like, I think that Dragon's Breath is just good anyways, as like this passive damage weapon, kind of like we've been talking about. And there's some other stuff going on there, kind of funky, that is pumping that up even further, maybe further than it should be. Who's to say? And the last thing I wanted to mention about rockets this season that I think has also been misconstrued is Argent Ordnance. Because Argent Ordnance states that whenever you shoot a rocket, you consume armor charge stacks, and it gives you buffs, and that goes away when you reload the rocket. That is false. It just buffs the rocket for 4.5 seconds. So I don't know exactly what's going on there, but it is not. It's slightly better than its description would lead you to believe if you are going in for a full-on rocket build and all this other stuff. So I'm also in the enjoyer, Dragon's Breath enjoyer camp these days. I'm happy that the naysayers have been proven wrong a little bit, and that it's viable, if nothing else, right? And for taking out champs and stuff.
It's a lot of fun, especially in this season, which is clearly focused on solar than any other element. Yeah, there's some stasis and some strand stuff in the artifact, but it's clearly, this is the season of solar. And just to your point about the artifacts, over something Mossy saw, I think it was late last, or during the weekend, I should say, for week 1, is that Overload rocket launchers, just to Overload champions, rocket launchers are granted an 80% increased damage against Overload champions. So not barriers, not unstoppables, nothing else, but 80% against Overload champions. And it's something that I was testing just for my champions infographic, where any rocket launcher damage, whether it's the impact, the explosive, the fire from Dragon's Breath, anything that's related to a rocket launcher's damage will trigger that overload. It's intrinsic. If the Overload champion just so happens to walk over the Dragon's Breath pools of fire, they'll get stunned, and you'll get that 80% against the Overload champion.
You know what else I've been thinking about is that Ignition stun unstoppable champions, right?
Yes.
So while it's not really optimal because you're going to hit the impact and have to wait for just a second before the ignition would go off, you technically could just throw this thing right in the face of an unstoppable ogre and walk away, and 2 seconds later, after the scorch ticks enough, it will ignite and stun the champion and do a little bit more lingering damage after that. It will do overload, and if you proc radiant, it could do barrier as well. So it's really, especially for overload, just absolutely cooking those overload minotaurs and stuff are don't stand a chance. Overload captains, whatever we've got in our GMs this season, but a lot of versatility in this thing.
Just on that point, and it's something that I put on my Reddit breakdown for champion stuff related to Dragon's Breath. So yeah, you can technically use it for the triple stun if you've got Radiant, if you've got Overload rocket launcher, and if you've got, obviously, well, it stuns with Ignition for unstoppables. If you have Overload rocket launcher on equipped, you won't be able to get the Radiant for anti-barrier because Artifact's got the second highest priority. So you won't get Radiant. You'll get the damage buff, but you just won't get the damage, the champion stun. And another point related to that is if you've got Overload rocket launcher on and you're trying to stun an unstoppable with the ignitions, if the initial scorch from Dragon's Breath hits a unstoppable, you get the ignition. It won't actually stun the unstoppable, and that's because Overload Rocket or the artifact mod is kind of conflicting with that. It's something that I saw back in season 21 when we had like auto rifle, we had trace rifles, so you could use like Tommy's matchbook and you could use Prometheus lens, and it was the exact same bug where if you applied the scorch, the initial scorch from those weapons, you wouldn't get the ignition stun on an unstoppable. So in order to avoid that, don't have Overload Rocket Launcher on in the first place, or apply Scorch from another source. So if you're a hunter, use Fan Blade and then use your rocket launcher if you still have Overload Rocket Launcher active. A lot of kind of technicalities here. It's a lot of kind of funny business that goes on. But yeah, my Reddit breakdown goes into more information. Yeah.
Thank you, Court. Always appreciate the clarification there. We do have a couple other weapons we can talk about real quick. Amethyst, I know you grabbed the Thorn Catalyst just before we sat down today. Court, have you managed to get this thing yet?
No, when you were doing your Coil run, I was in with Imtus. He managed to get it just before I joined up with him. We'd done a few, but we never got it. I've done some Gambit kind of solo the last couple of days, but no, I think the Catalyst drops have been pretty weak the last couple of seasons for me, unfortunately. So I'll get it eventually. But I am pretty interested in the Thorns, the whole like overflowing kind of mechanic here. I'm fairly interested in that.
I mean, just using it to fully unlock the Catalyst, it has felt very strong. I went back and I actually was just in Armor Breaker setting up a Necrotic Grips build because I want to use this thing with that build so much. I went back and rebuilt the whole thing, and that's only going to get stronger when the Catalyst, when you've actually finished the Catalyst, and it's going to seemingly dominate PvP meta. Like, I want to get this unlocked and done so I can be a menace in Iron Banner. I'm sorry, but I'm not sorry. I want that auto rifle, and I am going to, all moralities out the window when loot is in.
Get out
question.
of Sankavir's way when he's chasing loot. You heard it here, folks. The menace is coming.
Yeah, so PvE, PvP, come on. Go ahead, Kurt.
I'm looking at the stats for the Catalyst. So you get plus 20 range, plus 10 stability, as we know. When you pick up a Remnant, they don't have the range stat for this yet. It looks like it's going to be about 15 handling. And then you get mobility on top of that. So for my hunters, you will get plus 50 mobility just for picking up a soul. Which is crazy.
Easily the greatest stat bump we've ever had for one Catalyst.
Yeah,
by like a massive margin.
What if we just gave them gun and run and killing win and a bunch of base stats and reloaded the gun? What's the vibe?
Man, I do not envy the Trials players this weekend. Holy moly.
No, yeah. Which unfortunately, I do want that trace rifle, which we'll talk about in a second. So that will be me. I am my own curse, I guess. I don't know. I'm sure there's a metaphor there somewhere. The other exotics are a bow that appears to be tied to an exotic mission that is not in the game yet, so nobody's got that. And Buried Bloodline, which I talked about very briefly in the beginning of this episode. Honestly, I've only played with it for about an hour. I'm trying to go back and do the Catalyst because I believe the Catalyst applies a weaken effect when you have Devour up. So basically, you can proc Devour by landing hits, getting kills with the weapon, and then you can keep Devour up, obviously, while using the gun and just continuing to get defeats with your void abilities, anything like that. And then I think that the Catalyst is landing precision hits while you have Devour up will weaken a target, which is quite strong, and it's pretty easy to hit both crits. It kind of shoots, it kind of has like a double projectile, like Warden's Law kind of a thing, but it appears to be horizontal and not vertical. I believe the illusion was that it's a little bit more like how the old Warden's Law used to work. So, not quite the same, but a similar feel to that weapon for sure is honestly the only thing I think of that comes close to that. But it is very strange, and it sounds real weird.
Looks real weird too, let's be honest.
Yeah, it is really exotic looking. But
we'll talk about those in the future. for
Yeah,
sure.
I was going to say more detail there later.
So I think the exotic mission is due December 19th. So 2 weeks by the time this episode comes out. Yeah. And
Nice.
it looks like a minor spoiler, just close your ears for the next few seconds, but it looks like it's going to be craftable as well.
Wow, I can't believe they gave it Wolfpack rounds. That's crazy, Gordon. Okay.
Man.
All right, new exotic armor.
Yes.
Yeah, let's move on to the
Hunters.
exotic armor. We do not have new exotic armor this season, much like Season of the Seraph. I don't think any of us are complaining based on the amount of exotic armor reworks that we received for all three classes. Looks like there's some pretty crazy stuff going on here. Court, what happened on the hunter side here?
Yeah, hunters are eating well. I was going to say, Saint, you put out a little poll on your socials.
Oh, yeah.
And the Discord as well, just kind of getting some vibes. What was the kind of consensus from, people wanted new exotic armor? Did they want reworks?
So it was 3 new exotics or 6 meaningful updates, which we can qualify what makes that cut in just a second. But it was 80-20, 80% of people out of like 250 something that replied to the poll said they would rather have more meaningful updates to existing exotics than just putting new ones in the game, which I feel, just to what you were just saying, feels pretty in line with like how we're feeling about everything that's going on this season.
Yep, I completely agree with that.
So hunters, we are eating really good. With it being Season of the Solar, we've got 3 solar exotics. I'll kick us off with perhaps even like a completely staggered me when I saw the kind of all last minute buff that they added to the patch notes. Celestial Nighthawk obviously got the whole passive benefit, but they also increased the damage from they gave it a 25% buff, which was multiplicative, so it went from 500% to 650, and that's a comparison, if I can talk. That's a comparison to the first marksman shot. If you compare it with Star Eater scales, that's 3 marksman golden gun precision shots. It's 1% more than that. Previously, it was 23.5% or I should say, Star Eater scales 3 times was doing 23.5% more than Celestial Nighthawk. And it seems to be doing really well. I've seen a few rounds of videos of folks completely murking a bunch of bosses. I think that's what kind of needed for Celestial Nighthawk. It was really kind of down in the dumps here, but really cool to see. I don't have a build for that yet. I want to get one, but the other 2 that I have been using quite a lot, Shards of Galanor and Ophidius Spaith, I've been using. I've got 2 builds set up. Shards, a lot of fun. Obviously, you're getting your super back a lot. I've kind of went down the route of kind of building into an ignition. I've got Gunpowder Gamble. Just throwing that around, forgetting that I have it equipped, and then I throw it at the ground, thinking it's a healing grenade. I love the fantasy with the Gunpowder Gamble. Just being able to shoot it out the air, it's really, really cool. And recently, I've been taking it through the dungeon and Coil runs Ophidius Spaith, it's just throwing knives, the exotic, which is great. The other 2, Mechaneers Trick Sleeves, Triton Vice, I haven't really dabbled in quite yet. I want to look at Mechaneers with the rocket pistols or sidearms, Forerunner as well. And Triton Vice got a nice little buff for glaives, and obviously we've got Edge of Concurrence for the class glaive, so I want to tweak around with that. That's on my Arc subclass, but that's taking a little bit of a rest. I'm doing my solar stuff just now. But yeah, some really great reworks, some really solid ones. I am definitely in the camp of that 80% wanting reworked armor rather than new. Like some of these feel brand new, which is great. Really, my big highlight is shards. Use that in your blind well runs. you'll get your 50% super back, and then you just get your weighty throwing knife is what I've been using. Get those crit shots with the throwing knife to get your super back faster. And I've seen folks pair. It's just completely went out of my head. The pulse rifle, kinetic pulse rifle, exotic pulse rifle.
No time? Or
no.
The one with super thresh.
Yeah.
Bad juju.
Yes, thank you. I've seen folk pair that with Celestial Nighthawk, which is what I did suggest back a few months ago when we saw
juju.
That's like, apparently it's very crazy with the amount of Celestial Nighthawks you're dumping out. So solid reworks here. Warlocks, what have we been playing with?
So we did get changes to Apotheosis Veil, Ballador's Wrathweavers, Felwinter's Helm, and Karnstein's Armlets. I have been playing with Karnstein's. I have not touched the other three, but I have seen some pretty interesting things with Apotheosis Veil. I definitely will want to check it out. I'm debating whether or not I want to see if I can get a better roll of it with a bit higher intellect, but it does look like you can pull off some pretty insane ability spam, frankly, for 8 seconds after your super ends. I am curious to see how this exotic plays with our new Warlock Solar Super that's coming with the final shape. It seems like that super is based around a fair amount of ability spam itself, and so I'm curious to see once that super ends if I can keep the streak going with Veil. But again, I haven't played around with Veil, and I obviously haven't played around with the new super yet, so I don't want to get my hopes up too much, but I definitely want to check that one out. I haven't really seen a whole lot about Ballador's Wrathweavers. I mean, the change sounded cool on paper, but it does also sound like it's a lot of effort for a stasis super and stasis weapon damage that just frankly isn't really meta right now in a lot of in-game scenarios. I hate to say it. I'm glad that it's getting changes, but I just don't think the stasis element in general is considered damage worthy in the in-game environments where it really matters. Felwinter's Helm, again, I haven't played with it. It's a very niche exotic. I have been playing with Karnstein Armlets. I did get a patron that asked me for some recommendations on solar fragments for pairing with Karnstein Armlets, and the truth is, I'm still not sure which element I even want to play around with Karnstein on. I haven't even been on, well, I have been on Solar, but I've also been bouncing around to Strand just because I get 3 melee charges there, trying to figure out if that's going to be worthwhile. Again, you can use melee kills or finishers for the effects there. Finishers, of course, are element neutral or element agnostic, but I do want to make sure that whatever melee option I decide with is also strong as well, and so that's why I've been debating between Solar, Strand. I think we can rule Void out of the question just because that melee is not very lethal in the end game, although being able to pair Cure and Restoration with Devour would make for a very tanky solo build. But I think right now I'm kind of choosing whether or not I want to buff and extend my Cure and Restoration effects on Solar, or have the option to pair Woven Mail with Cure and Restoration on Strand subclass. Still working on that right now. I don't have a definitive answer for you yet, but Karnstein's is a very, very fun. We don't have a lot of melee builds on Warlock, so getting to really lean into that Titan fantasy on my Flooflock is very fun. And I'm just looking to see what kind of fragments I can pair, or fragments and aspects really I can pair with my melee and my finishers for a real concentrated, fully dedicated short range build with Karnstein's for survival, of course. But it is very fun, and it is I'm surviving just fine. I'll tell you what, with Cure times 3 and then Restoration for 8 seconds, it is very powerful. It can feel a little stressful, but once you get that kill, you're suddenly back to full health. Your health is recharging, you're taking damage, and then you're just chaining those finishers, either using my weapons or my melee abilities. So really, really love that a lot, and I gotta get an ornament for this thing because man, the exotic is just so ugly. I'll be honest, but hey, it's functional. That's all I care about. Saint, how are Titans?
Oh man, Things are happening. I'll tell you what. Things are happening over here, man. So we read the Peregrine Greaves buff a few weeks ago in the patch notes and thought, oh, that sounds cool. And it turns out they didn't want to write the actual number in the patch notes because it may have been too high to get approved to go into the game, because that number, for reference, you need to be using a powered melee charge here, and you need to be airborne for just a second. But against bosses and champions, you are getting a 1,000% increase in your melee ability. 10 times. And it is just ridiculous. If you hit a champion with this, not if you get the kill, if you hit a champion with this, you will get the full ability refunded. And I believe the same is true for a couple of enemies, but it's absolutely insane how much damage this will do. And what I've been seeing this paired with a lot, which totally makes sense, is something like offensive bulwark, because when you use something like, okay, Bastion is giving you an overshield whenever you're behind a barricade, and that's great. When you have the overshield up, offensive bulwark is giving you 100% increase in your melee damage. Well, now you're just adding on another multiplier into your already 10 times increase, 11 times increase on your melee ability. So you could be 25 points underneath level of a champion and still take out over 80% of their health in a single hit. You go into a lost sector, you stun a champion, put maybe one round of special ammo, whatever it is, into them, and then just bash them with your melee ability, and they're obliterated, just out of the park, and you've got the melee ability instantly back. So it's a champ killer, and it's his whole design, which is wild because it's such an aggressive play. But I'm definitely going to try to take advantage of this in some GM scenarios without just totally throwing, basically, for my team and having to have Coordinates here come res me like every 30 seconds, So as long as my champ kill rate is higher than my death rate, we're good, But you got to keep it on the positive side of that line there.
Saint, I don't want to interrupt you during your gushing of this exotic, but you mentioned bosses. Just to make it clear, it's champions, tormentors, and mini bosses. You don't get this on bosses. But I'll pass it back to you about an interesting tidbit about a certain raid boss.
Okay, so thank you for that, because I knew there was something confusing there. Nezarec is a mini boss, it turns out, because it works on
Nezarec's a tormentor.
A tormentor. Okay, yeah. That's where the qualification comes in. So you can just melee him to death if that's something that's in your interest with a group of 6 titans, and you just want to get to work. Just go for it. It's ridiculous. It's going to hit for like 850,000 damage per melee. And he's going to die in one phase, and you don't even have to use your guns past like a tractor cannon, which is dummy, honestly. Love it, though. Really enjoying that. Another one that sounded really interesting and I think has played out decently well is Worm God's Caress. The Burning Fist is its buff, and that gets stacked up to 5 times on melee, glaive melee, or finisher kills. And they said that this is also going to increase weapon damage. So to give some context on like its buff rate, I think that it's good to reference Syntheseps. So Syntheseps are 100% increase in glaive melee and 165 on melee otherwise when you're surrounded. Previously 200, so that was nerfed down just a little bit. Burning Fists is going to get to 165% at 3 stacks for increased melee damage, and then at stack 4, it will go to 220%, stack 5, 275%. And then again, for reference on glaive melee, at 3 stacks, or at 2 stacks, it's 80%, at 3, it's 120, at 4, 160, and 5, 200% for glaive melee. And this is good, but it's kind of tempered by the way the cooldown system is going to work, which I'll mention in just a second. And then to give context on the weapon side, at 2 stacks, it goes from 0 to 20%, and then 25, 30, all the way up to 35 at 4 stacks for increased weapon damage, which is very high, just like the 275% melee, 200% glaive, 35% weapon damage. But when you get up to those high stacks, it starts off at about 10 seconds per, decreased stack cooldown timer. When you get to 3 stacks, it's going to, 3, it's 4. And same thing for 4 stacks. And then at 5 stacks, it's going to be 3 seconds. So you're really having to do a lot of upkeep here with your melee damage to keep that up. So I think that's kind of a thing where you could stack up to 5 and then shoot off some burst DPS, get a rocket off, toss a worm, whatever the case may be. If you want to hit some really high burst DPS there, I definitely feel like there's potential there. But yeah, I think this landed really well, and it's definitely going to be a favored exotic when it comes to some of these glaive builds. Strand Melee is also has really high potential for using something like Worm Gods if you're going off a Synthos, which brings me to the next point. I've had a few people ask me, where's Strand Titan at after all these nerfs that Woven Mail and some of the other aspects of, cooldown mods and all this stuff, kind of got nerfed with Strand Titan. Synthos got nerfed. It's still really good. The exact same build from last season is still obscenely good. And if you're not counting your damage numbers, you may not even notice it in some scenarios. It's going to take you a little bit more maybe to polish off a champion when you're going in for that grapple melee combo. But other than that, it's still incredibly a strong kit. So if you're worried about your Synthos, Banner of War build becoming obsolete, it's not. You can use Worm Gods if you're in a super dense ad type of scenario and you want to have some fun there, but Synthos is still really good. Severance Enclosure got some buffs, being able to chain a little bit of its explosion, and it's got a damage increase straight up. Don't know if that's going to be super meta, but it is very fun to use. If nothing else, I need to spend some more time there. And finally, Precious Scars, giving you restoration is... It's kind of ridiculous. When we were doing a Coil run the other day, you just have restoration all the time. And the activator is so easy for just getting a kill, matching subclass, matching element there, that it's, it's crazy. It feels great to use, and it has a great team effect. There was a couple of times, I remember we were going through this, and Impetus was like, I'm going to die, and he was like, wait a minute, no, what the hell? I have restoration right now on my character? What's happening? Why is there restoration on my screen right now? Which, to be fair, it does not make very much sense historically with that's supposed to work, but it's great, and it's very effective, especially in a scenario like that where you've got the togetherness modifier. Maybe your health regen is not quite as high as you want it to be. It's really good. I don't even know what else to say. It's 15-meter radius restoration for you and your whole team. Gonna be an awesome survivability exotic.
Jump scare restoration.
Yeah. You can get with this new dungeon exotic, if you're on a Void subclass, you could have a Void Overshield up with Offensive Bulwark, and then get Devour going, and then also proc Restoration once you get a kill with the weapon. So that's fine. No need to look into that. It's working as intended. A final piece here, Court, you want to talk about Aeons for just a second? What's going on with our Aeons update?
Yeah, so all 3 got tweaks, and we talked about them last time. Selective Insight just kind of tweaked around. It's now got the generation for Super Energy, and then Selective Vigor. They kind of tapped more into on kind of supporting your allies, supporting your team by granting DR against combatants. We don't have numbers for that just yet, but the one we wanted to talk about here was Sective Force. So the wearer, the Aeon Gauntlet wearer using Sective Force on 4 precision hits on elites, mini-bosses, or champions, or stunning champions will mark them. So kind of think of Cenotaph here, and the marked targets take 20%. It's its own thing from what I've been told, what I've seen. So it will stack with Divinity. It will stack with Empowering buffs. Very interesting change here. It obviously means you have to wear Sective Force for the onset. You can't use Cenotaph, obviously, with this. So it's kind of a pick your kind of poison or pick your benefit here if you want ammo regeneration for getting those power bricks for your allies, or if you want to just go into like a kind of burst build here where you stack a debuff like Divinity or Tractor Cannon plus Well of Radiance here. This is going to be your thing. Obviously, it's more kind of curated towards kind of Grandmasters, maybe even Coil runs, just to kind of spec into that. It doesn't affect bosses. So again, it's kind of similar to Saint, you were talking about Peregrine Greaves there. So it's kind of in the same vein here, where it's just against your kind of middling combatants with like mini bosses and champions. So very, very cool change there.
Oh man, I just had a wonderful, horrible, terrible idea, because you just mentioned Peregrine Greaves, and now I'm thinking, why don't you just stun the champion with an Aeon Sective Force Divinity, get a 38% debuff on him, and then just insta-gib with the shoulder charge from the side?
I'm going to edit my champions infographic, and it's just going to be a big blurry image of the icon for Peregrine Greaves and the Sective Force icons, and that's it. That's how you stun champions. It's those two things.
Yeah, that's
Every warlock just fell to their knees.
Don't worry, now you have
yet
twice
another
the reason to run it.
Yeah. Wow. Thanks, guys. Sweet.
I should also say, so Sector Force has got kind of additional stuff. So the wearer, when they score those 4 precision hits, they get plus 10 reloads. They get a 15% reload scaler, and you'll get plus 10 ready/stow handling for 10 seconds. And then for the Aeon allies that are not using Sector Force, so it's those that are using Vigor or Insight, they will be granted some amount of grenade and melee energy. We don't have those details just yet, but that's on your first mark. So you can't loop it. You can't just keep marking a combatant, say a champion here. But I think that's a very interesting change. I think we're going to need to do like an Aeon set.
Yeah, like Aeon Trio.
GM run it some. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Each with a different mod.
Yeah, Class Claves and the Aeon Gauntlets. We're doing it, baby.
Let's go.
GM run.
Whoa.
All right, shall we get into our new perks and origin traits, and also the new legendary weapons? We've got 4 new perks, 3 new origin traits. On the perk side, we've got Attrition Orbs. We kind of knew about this from the TWID that was talking about our ritual weapon, which was a caster frame sword that had the Attrition Orbs. Dealing sustained damage will generate an orb of power. This is showing up in columns 3 and 4 on a number of different weapons here. I think we're still working out the exact values to actually spawn the orb of power across different weapon types here. We've got Deconstruct, which is a construct-focused damage perk? Yeah, damage perk. We'll go damage perk here. Dealing sustained damage grants bonus damage against constructs for an improved duration and partially refills the magazine from reserves. So it's got a reload quality to it. Damage with primary ammo or against constructs provides additional progress. And then really, really cool here, they've also provided a little knowledge tidbit here on the weapon perk itself in-game. Constructs includes barricades, turrets, stasis crystals, and other objects created in the field. So little bit of quartz work showing up in-game. We love to see that. Shout out to Bungie for actually providing some definitions for what a construct is. Love to see that. And I think this one is currently showing up in column 4 for almost all the weapons that it is appearing on, which seems to be almost every new weapon has Deconstruct on it.
Yeah, pretty much.
Yeah, Permeability is another one that is showing up here, and I've seen it on columns 3 and 4. Very, very interesting weapon. The cousin, the sister to Osmosis, but instead of using our grenade, we're using our class ability. So where this one kind of differentiates itself beyond just the difference in ability usage is this is showing up on energy weapons, which Osmosis has never showed up on. Osmosis has been only on our kinetic slot weapons. And again, I think it's all just kinetic weapons, but then it did also show up on heavy weapons. It does show up on the chain of command stasis machine gun. So it has showed up on an energy weapon, but in the heavy slot, whereas permeability is mostly showing up in the energy slot, but it does allow you to turn your arc weapon into a stasis weapon if you use your class ability and you happen to be on a stasis subclass. So very interesting. Again, it's a utility perk, and it is showing up in columns 3 and 4 on a number of our new weapons here. And then the final weapon, which I imagine is going to be quite enjoyable to play against in PvP and very interesting to pull off in PvE, is Slice. This is our second strand weapon perk here, and it is showing up in column 3. So we do have a pairing to our Hatchling, which did debut with the strand subclass all the way back at the start of the year of Lightfall. Slice reads, casting your class ability allows this weapon to sever targets on hit for a brief duration up to a maximum number of targets. That final phrase there, I think, is still being tested out as what is the actual maximum number of targets. I've seen some different information for different weapons. I don't know if it's consistent or not. I don't know if you guys have heard anything about that. But yes, this is a Sever-based weapon perk, which is very cool. Sever is a debuff verb for Strand. Applying Sever to a target makes their damage output lower. And so as you can imagine, in PvP, that is going to be a lot of fun to lower your opponent's damage output. I know that really messes with a lot of hand cannons, so I imagine we'll be seeing that in some more in-game PvP scenarios as a bit of a tactical play here. On the PvE side, it is pretty easy to sever targets. We do have some fragments that really make that easy, but again, one of the flexibilities with weapons is you don't need to be on the Strand subclass to take advantage of this verb. You can apply this debuff to targets if you happen to be on a different subclass and just running a Strand weapon with the Slice trait. So very, very curious to see how this plays out. I don't currently have any Slice weapons, so I haven't gotten to play with it a whole lot, but it is showing up on, I think, all of our new Strand weapons this season across the PvE and PvP sandboxes, so very excited to play with that. We do have 3 new origin traits. Advanced Reflexes. This is showing up on our Dreaming City weapon. So let me just go grab a Dreaming City weapon real quick here. That is reading that upon taking damage from a target, quickly guard or aim down sights with this weapon to gain bonus mobility, handling, and charge rate for a short time. I imagine that will probably have a lot more impact in PvP than PvE, although hunters may be able to take advantage of that mobility and handling a little bit more than warlocks and titans. But because this is an origin trait, I don't imagine those gains to be super significant. On our actual seasonal weapons, the Season of the Wish weapons, we have Dragon's Vengeance. That one is going to read, when an ally dies or you reach critical health, and again, as we defined in our Survivability PvE University episode, critical health is when you don't have any shields and you're at that red portion of your health that's flashing. So when an ally dies or you reach critical health, this weapon's magazine refills and it gains bonus range, charge rate, and handling. We are still working on the testing for a lot of these. We do know that the charge time is decreased by 5%, but we don't know about the range and handling bonuses. This one seems like it could be quite interesting in PvE, actually, for boss or mini-boss damage scenarios here. Getting to critical health or having an ally die while you're trying to deal damage during a boss phase could make this for a really interesting option. Again, I don't think you'd want to actively spec into this. That could be very, very dangerous and very inconsistent, but, you know, as a kind of back pocket option, which is kind of where origin traits generally sit, this could be incredibly useful for having a free magazine refill when you get to critical health. I don't know, maybe I would consider this for like a solo dungeon experience or like a legendary campaign option if I'm playing by myself here, but maybe not necessarily for an intended raid environment. We do have, oh, I'm sorry, we had 4 origin traits total because we have the Vex Offensive one and then our Dungeon origin trait. The Vex Offensive one is Nano Munitions. Very, very interesting option here for our Reprise Vex weapons. Being near allies slowly builds up a partial emergency ammo refill for the next time this weapon runs out of ammo. Emergency ammo count increases with time spent near allies. And again, that distance is 15 meters. You do grant a stack of nano munitions every 3 seconds, up to a maximum of 7. And then consuming 1 stack restarts the timer. If you consume up to 4 stacks, upon emptying the magazine, it will refill 25% of it for each consumed stack. So you can get a total of, let's see. Yeah, you can get, you can't get 100%, but you could get, 25-ish. Very interesting. That seems like you'd probably want that for a raid, maybe a dungeon. I don't know. I guess, well, with the Coil having the togetherness modifier, maybe you could really proc that consistently in the Coil. But I think that would probably be more for raids, or I guess I could probably pull it off in like Iron Banner. Basically 6-person activities there, but an interesting one for sure. And then Sundering, which is our Warlord's Ruin option here. And I don't actually have the text for this, but it's construct related because I don't have the ability to pull it up.
I just saw a description that reads, upon destroying a vehicle or construct, it grants reload speed and charge rate.
Thank you very much. Yes.
Yeah.
So we've got another construct based origin trait here. Don't know how I feel about this one as an in-game origin trait. I'll be honest. This one kind of disappointed me a little bit, but we'll probably give more of our thoughts on this when we do our proper Warlord's Ruin episode. But anyways, those are your 4 new perks and 4 new origin traits. Let's actually get into the weapons that can drop with these. Saint, what kind of weapons are we getting from Season of the Wish?
Well, I just want to say one last thing about Sundering that Court mentioned yesterday was that the taken turrets within the dungeon count as constructs. It's the only reason I was like, okay, that's okay. I mean, like I'm okay with that in this sense, because you're like constantly fighting against those things in the dungeon. So there's like a modicum of value there at least. But yeah, weapons side, we have a ton. I mean, there's like 30 different weapons between like the Season of the Wish weapons, Dreaming City refresh weapons. We have Vex offensive weapons coming back. We have new playlist weapons, and we have new World and Foundry weapons. So I figure we can kind of pick some to jump back and forth here. The ones, I think a lot of these have been known for a long time, so I'll just cover real quick. The Wish weapons, we've got a Strand Slug shotgun called Supercluster, Doom Partitioner, which is a Void Aggressive Frame Linear, a Scattered Signal, which is a Strand Rapid Fire Fusion, Scalar Potential, and Arc Rapid Fire Pulse. Lethophobia, I believe is how you pronounce that one, is a lightweight bow. I think that's Arc. And then a Penance is a Stasis Trace Rifle. The Dreaming City and Vex offensive ones are classic. Those are just reworks on all those guys. And then we do have some brand new ones for the Playlist and World stuff. Double-Edged Answer is a Void Adaptive Sword Frame coming from Strikes. Retro Futurist is a Void Lightweight Shotgun, which is the Crucible Playlist weapon of the season. Breakneck is a previous Pinnacle weapon returned this season, Kinetic Precision Frame Auto Rifle for Gambit. I have Soul and Messenger, both got the wild card trait, and then we have obviously the new Strand Trace Rifle, which is in Trials, and then Lethal Abundance, which is a Strand High Impact Auto Rifle in Iron Banner. And then finally for World and Foundry, we have Parabellum, a field-forged solar adaptive SMG, Ross Arago 4, which is a Cassoade Void Adaptive Frame Auto, Mercado 45, a Suros Strand Adaptive Machine Gun, and then Crux Termination 4, which is a Cassoade Arc Aggressive Frame Rocket. So we'll pick a kind of bounce back and forth on some highlights here. The one that I wanted to start off with that is like very near and dear to my heart is Breakneck. I put like a ridiculous number of like 10,000 kills on the original version of this, and it's back, and the trait Onslaught is back, and it is rolling in the 4th column. And this trait has also been updated. So when Breakneck originally came out, it had Rampage and then Onslaught, and Onslaught basically stated that when you have stacks of Rampage, the RPM of the weapon also goes up. That was nerfed eventually so that whenever you would get stacks of Breakneck or stacks of Onslaught, the impact would go down as the RPM went up, and that had a negative impact on your damage output. The whole Rampage involvement has been totally removed, and now it's just as you get kills, your rate of fire goes up. Don't have the exact numbers on this. It may not land exactly in archetypes, kind of like Adagio and some other things like that don't exactly land in precise other archetypes. But the general feeling is you have a 450 auto, you get a kill with Onslaught, and it's slowly ramping up to feel more and more like a 600 RPM or 720 RPM auto. And it's not losing any impact damage, which is super interesting. And the thing can also roll with like kinetic tremors and some other great column 3 perks. But yeah, definitely a highlight for me. I'll pass you over to Court. I don't know, Court, what's jumping out at you here out of all our weapons for this season?
It's quite a few. Scatter Signal is our Strand Rapid Fire Fusion Rifle. I am kind of looking, well, obviously with that being craftable, it's I'm not really looking for any rolls in particular right now. Let's have a look here. So yeah, it's got Controlled Burst. It has Hatchling if you want to go down that route. It's got Deconstruct if you want to go down that route in terms of vehicles and constructs. It also has Overflow in the third column. Very, very interesting to see that on a fusion rifle. Very interesting. It also has Slice, as we mentioned, if you want to go down that route. I'm not too sure if it's going to count every bolt as its own individual for each severing. I'm not sure how that would interact. But yeah. So Scatter Signal, what else we got here? Yeah, I want to get that Stasis Trace Rifle, a Penance. That looks really... really cool. I think I'm a 4 out of 5 for the Trace Rifle. I've really lucked out there.
Good stuff, dude.
Man.
Yeah.
Dude.
Yeah, it's been really lucky. So I haven't managed to get the Thorn Catalyst, but this is where it's like, oh, the game's pretty kind with me for the seasonal weapons. Again, we'll talk about the perks when we get to them, but yeah, I'm just seeing like One for All there, Killing Tallies there, Attrition Orbs if you want to go for that kind of sustained damage. It's very good for a Trace Rifle, Headstone. But the one that's kind of drawing me is Part of the World / Foundry loot pool, and that's Crux Termination. It's got some very interesting perk combinations we've never seen before. For a rocket launcher. Again, we'll talk about this in a kind of exclusive episode for these weapons, but to give you some perspective, Crux Termination, it's an arc aggressive rocket launcher, so that's your 10% plus damage profile. It has 45 inventory size stat, so that's the same as Cold Comfort. It's 5 less than His and Vengeance, but that puts it up in the upper tier. There's no field prep on Crux, but that means you can get 10 reserves 10 total ammo with 3 reserves. It rolls Envious Assassin and Reconstruction, which is extremely unique for this rocket launcher because it's the only one. You can't get both of them at the same time. It's all in the third column, but you've got a choice here. You can't craft it. You just kind of have to pray to the RNG lords that you're going to get this drop. Yeah, definitely wishing here. Apex Predator is the only other rocket launcher that gets Reconstruction. And as a reminder, you get 2 at base. If you're pairing this with Bipod, it goes up to 4. But Envious Assassin is the 3 with Bipod. 3 at base and then 5 with Bipod. I want to see the interaction here. Also rolls Clown Cartridge. We've not seen that for many, many, many rocket launchers. I think the last one that rolled it would have been either Hothead or Hes and Vengeance. Not Hes and Vengeance. I'm looking at the wrong graph here. I think Hothead was the last one to get Clown Cartridge. And again, it's quite simple for a rocket launcher. It's you just get +1 on top of that. So you get 2 in the magazine on reload, on an explicit reload. So that's your manual reload or marksman/Dragon Shadow reloads. But it pairs with bipod, and I'm really curious how that will interact. So you've got a lot of options to have many rockets in one magazine here. I don't have the values here. I want to get a bipod Clown Cartridge roll for Crux just for science purpose, but that would be its unique perk combo roll that only rolls on Crux termination, Clown Cartridge and bipod. So lots of choices in terms of ammo.
It gets eddy current.
Yeah, yes, it sure does.
What else are you looking for? Let's just stop there.
At long last, eddy current rocket launcher. We're here.
It also gets surrounded as well as a damage perk, explosive light, demos there in the 4th column. Maybe not so much that useful when you've got damage perks, but there's a lot of strange combinations you can run with Crux here, and the new permeability here as well. You don't have to have it as arc; you can have it any element you want. So that is my pick. Again, probably a deeper breakdown in the future once I get some rolls. I've been managed to get Crux a few times, which is great. I think just as a final note from me, I think the other World Foundry drops, Arago 4 and Mercato 45 are the 2 that I'm pretty interested in as well. But Imtis, you got any kind of highlights here?
I saw Saint wanted to bring up a point here. What do you got, Saint?
We forgot a perk. Now, it's not a new perk. It's a rework perk, and it allows you to throw yourself into the air with a rocket launcher.
Have you tested it? I haven't tested it, so.
Danger Zone? Right?
Yeah.
It will eliminate self-damage from rockets when you have the perk active, so you can rocket jump with a rocket launcher in Destiny the game now, and that is a beautiful thing, just absolutely adore that exists in this game. Okay, that's all I got.
It doesn't drop on Crux, so you gotta dust off those old rocket launchers if you've kept it on those. I'm actually curious so it drops on semi-automation, so you can craft it on Semio, or Apex, and if you've got a blowout or a hothead, if you've kept them around for some reason with that Danger Zone perk, it's quite funny.
Yeah.
Well, I did say at the start of the episode that I am wishing for world loot, and so that is what I'm chasing for here. Again, I'll the seasonal weapons are craftable. I'll get those in time. No rush there. Dreaming City, it's really just vouchsafe. But again, I'm sure with the amount of coil runs I'm going to be doing the next few weeks, statistically, I've got a pretty good chance of getting a good vouchsafe here. But yeah, I am looking at all 4 of those Foundry weapons. I did just right before the start of the episode get a demo Onslaught Mercato 45. I'm very curious to see how Onslaught pairs with a machine gun. Again, it's very easy to get kills with a machine gun, so I think I'll be able to get to those higher stacks. I think, correct me if I'm wrong, but Onslaught did go up originally to ×3, right, in terms of the stacking capabilities because it matched Rampage. So I'm very curious to see what a ×3 Onslaught on a machine gun feels like, and I know I'll have the magazine size to get up there pretty easily. And if I run out of mags, I will just throw a grenade and have demo proc and get right back into business. So very excited to play with that. I do absolutely want that Crux termination to replace my Hothead. The other one I'm chasing, though, the Rosarago, that Void Adaptive Auto, I think we at long last do have a competitor, if not a replacement to Gnawing Hunger, which, by the way, we didn't mention this. Gnawing Hunger is now focusable at Drifter. They have updated the focusable weapons at the core vendors here. Main ingredient got added to Commander Zavala, believe it or not. They're still expensive. They're 5 of the respective engrams each, but you can go focus for some of those weapons now that their perk pools haven't been updated. They don't have origin traits. It's the original weapon here, so I don't want to get anyone's hopes up too high. But if you did miss out on those, or if you're wanting to go chase some of those other weapons, those older weapons, you can go do that. But Rasarago does get Rewind Onslaught, which I think would be a really crazy primary weapon for getting some pretty crazy damage out once that RPM gets jumping up there. So that is what I am wishing for. Whether or not Riven will give it to me over the next 180 days, remains to be seen here. But Parabellum is also pretty interesting. Parabellum, that solar adaptive SMG, does get Heal Clip Frenzy. I do want a weapon with that combination, because again, I think that's going to be really great for getting Heal Clip up as quickly as possible in PvE when Frenzy maxes out my reload speed, so I can get that faster reload to the cure. So that's what I'm hoping for. Again, if it drops, great. If it doesn't, I'll make do. But yeah, they've finally given us some world loot that is pretty desirable. I don't have a lot of great ways to chase it though, which of course is the big bummer. And the old world loot did get added to Legend Lost Sectors, or I should just say the high level Lost Sectors, because I know a lot of people have been farming those Master Lost Sectors for the additional perk in either Column 3 or Column 4. Seems like that change went over really well. I haven't personally partaken in that, but I've heard some pretty positive things. Again, we do know that we were given a set schedule for which weapons are available on which days, and there's a 4-day cycle there. So I think that's going to be a good change moving forward. But again, I think for a lot of us, we're kind of hoping that this current world loot does get added to that Lost Sector schedule, so we can go start farming for those extra perks, or even just to get the drop to drop, because again, world loot's kind of rare, and it doesn't seem like it's dropping for Banshee, which really stinks. Banshee's dropping the old Foundry stuff with his gunsmith materials, gunsmith engrams. So yeah, but I think that's all I have to say. Anything else that you guys have to say about the world loot or any of these other items that are dropping from their various sources?
So I forgot to mention the Crux has Cassoid, the wild card traits, where it drops the Telesta bolts. Obviously, it's tied to enemy ranks, so you want to get, bosses, it drops 7 sub-munitions, the Telesta bolts, at it looks like a 100% chance. So if you kill a boss, let's go down one rank actually. Mini bosses, which again it's 100%. I think it's around about 5 sub-munitions. But those sub-munitions scale with the rocket launcher damage scaling, and for rocket launchers that is quite substantial. I'm looking at Mossy's chart again. Shout out to him. The scaling spreadsheet will be on the D2 spreadsheets link tree if you want to see that. But for bosses, champions, mini bosses, it's 4.7 times multiplier to those Telesta bolts, and for elites it's 5 times, and for rank and file it's 6 times. So that's some of the highest that you can get in terms of damage scaling, tied to not just Telesta bolts, but anything that's tied to the damage kind of modifier when it comes to these things. So that was my kind of last minute note to add.
So basically, if you didn't kill anything with the actual rocket itself, the little balls will take care of them, the cleanup, if you will.
Very much. I mean, aggressives aren't great for ad clear. They've got the lowest blast radius. They're more for just single target damage. But if you're using this, I mean, it's fine to use in these ad dense activities. You'll get those Telesta bolts, and you'll do a lot more damage when you spawn those Telesta bolts.
How many does a player spawn?
A player, they're normally tied to elites, which are so three sub-munitions, and it's 100% chance.
And how many of those do we think? How much damage are those each going to be doing in PvP? Because I imagine a world where you kill somebody with this rocket launcher and it leaves 3 high damage, on their little shards behind.
Yeah, I see what you mean. I'm not entirely sure. Mossy doesn't have a section for Guardians. I think they would be pretty scaled down anyway. But if they are attached to elites, which they are for a lot of things in terms of damage, in terms of modifier gains, Guardians are, for all intents and purposes, elites. That would be 5 times, but we might need to do some science.
Well,
on
for
that.
science, for science, we should use this.
Someone's just going over a Telesta bolt and getting obliterated in their super.
It does 400 damage to this unsuspecting guy that just walked up on a little piece of shard glowing on the ground, and it just out of there, dude.
Ooh, shiny.
Yeah, there are some other new weapons. We surprisingly got the legendary rocket-propelled sidearm, rocket-assisted frame sidearm in the new dungeon, as well as a lot of other weapons. Looking very good. Still need to do some more testing there, but a lot of really interesting rolls on that thing. Seemingly doing a lot of like high damage per shot. But we're not going to jump all the way into Warlord's Ruin. Maybe next week, or as long as we've got all the whole crew here, we'll be doing a big breakdown on the dungeon builds, encounter tips, and the loot for the dungeon. But what was the We kind of opened up. We talked about our blind runs here. Cord, I'll go back to you. What early vibes on Warlord's Ruin?
Fantastic. I love the location. The lore is very interesting. We were having this kind of short discussion before we hopped on to start the episode today, but it's just fascinating. I think it's really, it harks back to, it gives me Rise of Iron vibes, which I think everyone's been saying, just with like walking up the mountain.
Mm-hmm.
You started with Rise of Iron, you walked up, what do you call it? Vostok. So the location's really great. The mechanics are a lot of fun. I think they've done a really good job in terms of balancing the health for each of the bosses. It's one of our first dungeons that have got 3 bosses instead of just your 2, like whether it's a starter then wedged with a mechanical like Prophecy and then a final boss, or if it's like a mechanical at the start and then 2 bosses like Ghost of the Deep. But I've been having a blast. I think the final boss, again, we'll get into the nitty gritty when it comes to the dungeon, but the final boss is very interesting in terms of how you approach it. We've kind of been talking about how the different damage, what are our options here. I know you guys were talking about Dragon's Breath. We tried Leviathan's Breath for a little bit, but wasn't quite hitting. We swapped over to the enhanced surrounded Briar's Contempt LFR. I think that was going a little bit more, a little bit better compared to Leviathan's Breath. But the whole vibe, it's just a lot of fun, and it harks back to kind of classic Destiny in a way, where you complete an activity, a raid, or well, not back then, it wasn't called dungeon, but like say an exotic mission. Then you'd rewind it, you'd go back in, and you'd find all the little secrets. It's given me Destiny 1 vibes, and in a very good way. So, again, we'll talk about like the loot. I know there's some comments about the loot. I will save that for the future, but I am definitely looking forward to using that exotic, and I've got a few rolls of the pistol, the rocket pistol. I'm contemplating if I should add that to my rocket launcher infographics. Probably not. It's a lot of work, but very fun weapon type. Impetus, what's your vibes?
Yeah, I mean, dungeons clearly are Bungie's sweet spot when it comes to in-game activities. They've just been on a roll for years now, and I think, I certainly had some issues when the Dungeon Pass was first announced. Like, wow, really? We're going to start charging extra for dungeons? But no, they've definitely increased the quality of these activities since the Dungeon Pass has come out, and I appreciate that, and I love playing them. This one is probably going to rank highly up there. Again, I still got to play through it a few more times before I can give it a definitive placement on where I will rank it. But yeah, fun boss fights, fun mechanics too. I think the second encounter in particular has a lot of really fun things going on, and I think should end up being a really interesting solo experience. And yeah, the final boss fight is just like straight out of a raid. It's just incredible. I really, really enjoyed doing it with Saint and Aeon for the first time, going through there and really kind of strategizing on the fly and figuring out the mechanics on the fly and stuff. So yeah, that's going to be a ton of fun.
Yeah, that was awesome. We didn't wipe at all on the final boss. It just took us a while to figure out what was actually happening. So we were just kind of like running around, dealing with the different mechanics, trying to figure out how to get a little bit better of a damage phase and all that stuff. But yeah, that was a lot of fun. The theme and just like feel of the environment is crazy good. I'm like outside of like things that I had seen that were in development when I was working there, so it's really nice coming back into the zone of being like surprised by like what you're seeing when you come to the game, and I not knowing what to expect, in that kind of like surprise and delight moment of like you come out on the edge of like a terrace and you're just looking out over this like mountain vista in the game. It's just like absolutely beautiful, and the whole feeling of Rise of Iron, kind of like being in this castle the whole time and like fighting your way through that was really awesome, and not something that I don't know that we've had that kind of feeling or type of environment for a really long time. So yeah, high praises. Environment, bosses, the lore is interesting, like got some loot that I'm interested in. So generally early vibes are very good.
I don't know if it was the same for you guys, but on like initial like first blind run, just going in, I felt like I was playing a completely different game. I felt like I was playing Dark Souls at one point, and just like going through the castle, like the ruined castle, it's just like, this feels, in a very good way, this feels very different to typical Destiny. And like when we played Ghosts, I felt, yeah, this is still ingrained in Destiny kind of vibe. It's still feeling like I'm playing Destiny, but on that first run I felt, this is really special, this feels very different. So like, for those that are listening to us, if you haven't played the dungeon, yeah, the whole kind of point about it being attached to, well, either getting the Lightfall like special edition or buying the dungeon keys, you've got two banger dungeons for this year. This one especially, I think. Go through it blind. Play it with a bunch of other folks who haven't played it. Fireteam Finder is obviously coming out very shortly, so you may have that opportunity to do that. But I feel like it's a special kind of type of vibe going through this. Really fun.
This is like a way deep cut. I just had to look up what the name of this was because it's been so long. But back during the era of Borderlands 2, I want to say the last Borderlands 2 DLC that they put out was Tiny Tina's Assault on Dragon Keep. And it had this whole like very like D&D, like classic fantasy type of a vibe to the DLC. And that was like the feeling that I got going through the dungeon for sure. Was like, I've been in this, sci-fi shooter world, but now I'm in a dungeon and, I'm like fighting my way through traps and things like that. And that's a high praise. That was a great DLC.
I think as a final point for me anyway, for the dungeon is to say, I think Bungie have really, like, going back to like Shatterthrone and Pit of Heresy and even Prophecy's still kind of up there in terms of like nostalgia for me. It's a very fun dungeon, but we've come far, and this is where I think Bungie has like just like the magic is there. It's the same with raids as well. I think the dungeon and the raid team have been really kicking out the park. Yeah, that we've got complaints about Ron, like Root of Nightmares. The mechanics were great, but it was the difficulty spike which wasn't there. Was my, I think, well, everyone's kind of problem with that raid. Mechanically, it's a great fun raid. It's kind of rebounded with Crota's End last season. But, the raid and the dungeon team, I think, golf claps all around for them. Like, they are making some really just high quality content.
I'm glad you said the word magic, because it did feel magical going through it blind. Even after we spent a little bit too much time in jail trying to figure out what proved to be a pretty basic mechanic. But boy, did we exhaust all the other possible complicated options. But
Yeah.
getting to the second boss fight, and then especially getting to that third boss fight, and actually going through the whole rotation the first time around, being like, "Are we really going to do this? Oh, we are doing this, and is that really what I think it? Oh, it is what I thought it was. Oh my gosh. Okay, and now I got to do it again. Okay, all right, let's go, boys. Let's run it back. That was magical. That's a perfect word to describe it. They really did. They really did bring it home for Warlord's Ruin, and I love that.
Yeah. All right. Well, that is going to wrap up episode 89 of PvE. Really strong start here coming into Season of the Wish. Got plenty of things to break down, plenty of weapons to chase as we settle in for a bit of a long season here with a lot of various events and other weapons coming up that we'll talk about in due time. Thanks for listening to another episode of PvE. We also want to thank our audio engineer, Autodidaktos, for helping us sound our best every single episode. My name's Sink Beer. You can find me by that name on social media, hanging out in the Massive Breakdown server or in game. Court, where can our listeners find you?
Yeah, you can find me over on social media and the Discord server as Court Projects, or you can find me over in the Coil, chasing after those red shards that are falling off the edge of the map. But you can also find my spreadsheets and infographics over on the Destiny Linktree or the Destiny Massive Breakdowns website, along with many other valuable content, spreadsheets, websites, etc., to enhance your Destiny experience. Impetus, where can we find you?
My name is Impetus. You can find me by that name in Discord and in Destiny, chasing that elusive world loot. We will see you next week. Get out there, grab some great rolls, have a good time. We'll see you later.